So I think that kind of we got like 20 minutes or so left, and so this actually pretty much brings us to our last little section here on more modern organizing and what all of this means for the Green Party and the idea of green socialism and eco-socialism, and of course lead to ideas to keep in mind for how we should organize in sight of all these ideas. So one point to consider is that we've talked about the challenges that we're facing, both historically as well as in front of us with things like climate change. And so it's reasonable to ask the question, is a socialist society even possible? Can we even get there? Are we even making sense when we say we want to work toward this? And I think it's a reasonable question to ask, but I think there's also an answer that heavily, strongly leans toward, yes, we can reach a socialist society. And maybe none of us today know what that looks like. And maybe, like Chris said, this is a multi-generational project where maybe no one alive today knows what it's going to become, but it will eventually get there. And we can feel confident in that answer because, for example, for almost the entirety of human society, humans have lived in very egalitarian and essentially socialist societies, ones where that have been focused on basic principles like cooperation and working together, mutualism. Peter Kropotkin, who is a big name in the anarcho-communist side of things, actually wrote a great book called Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution, where he strongly argued about how mutual aid is a fundamental aspect of the reason that humans and other species have evolved, and that evolution allows complex life to exist, or I should say, evolution favors cooperation and mutual aid in order for there to be complex life that exists. If everything was in competition and eating each other all the time, then there would be no room. There'd be no time for things to evolve this complexity. Think about how vulnerable human babies are when they're grown. Like, they can't even lift their head up for the first however many months.
We're one of the only animals that generally can't give birth on its own. It can happen. People have given solo birth, but in terms of mortality rates and everything like that, humans are not made to give birth. Modern anatomical humans are not made to give birth and care for a child alone in isolation.
Yeah.
And it's an important counter as well to the capitalist. When capitalists talk about human nature, it's always competition is human nature.
Yep.
Absolutely not. We would never have became modern humans if collaboration and cooperation hadn't been number one. Now, was there hierarchy and exploitation and oppression involved in that? The systems we set up to cooperate and to form society? Absolutely, right? From once we started dividing labor and religion came in and things like that, we absolutely developed power hierarchies, but we never would have gotten out of hunter-gatherers. We probably wouldn't even gotten to hunter-gatherer stage, right? If we weren't collaborating as a group, if we weren't, we're fundamentally social animals. Humans are animals.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe humans are in some sense the most extreme case, the most vulnerable case. But as Kropotkin wrote in the book, that we see this across many different species across the animal kingdom, that just some version of cooperation or mutualism is essentially necessary for life on Earth. The idea that competition is what drives things is the wrong take on evolution. That's not actually what evolution does. So for one thing, that's an important aspect to both counter in terms of the capitalist propaganda, but also to keep in mind to encourage ourselves that human nature, if there is such a thing, that's its own complicated discussion. But, to the extent that there is a human nature, it's one that's much more built on cooperation and community and mutual aid and things like that. And, if we can build our society to favor those traits, we can move toward a socialist society. And the other aspect of this to keep in mind is, we were just talking about history, about how capitalism grew out of monarchies and the feudal period and things like that. The other aspect of this is that capitalists treat capitalism as if it's been around since the dawn of time, and capitalism has only been around for really like a couple of lifetimes, like like a few generations. This is really a very, very new thing in human history. So they act like capitalism is inevitable, and it's not. This is something that is very new in human history, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. Humans have existed for a long time before this, and humans will exist after capitalism if we can organize and change it.
If we can't, we won't.
Yeah.
If we can't, if we can't organize out capitalism, then humans won't exist beyond capitalism because it will kill us.
Yeah, and right. Ultimately, that grow or die imperative is going to exploit people and exploit the planet until either we change or the planet gets rid of us, more or less. So this is an important thing to go. So, we have to follow that idea of mutualism and cooperation to build the new kind of human society that can live in harmony with nature and ecology to move forward. And so, an important part of that is none of us really know exactly what that looks like. We have ideas, right? We kind of know the direction that we need to move in. We have policy like the Green New Deal, and we have values and all that we've been talking about in this presentation. But we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. We don't know exactly what the moment is going to look like when capitalism crumbles and socialism takes over and we live in an ecological harmony. And it's really wrong to think of it in terms of there being an end point, like that there's going to, like on Thursday, it's going to be eco-socialism. It's not going to be that way. We have to think about it really as an ongoing process that, as far as we know, is going to go on indefinitely. That we are going to always be, the socialist project is one of always improving humanity, always pushing to try to do better. And so that's another aspect of this, that socialism is not necessarily an end goal, but it's the journey, right? It's the process of trying to improve ourselves and to deal with the problems as they come up. And as we address certain problems, we might notice other problems, or maybe other, especially like environmental related problems, might come up over time that we weren't even aware of. And so, there'll be this continual process of dealing with challenges as they come up. But, as we're moving toward the socialist society, we're creating one where everyone has a say. It's that democratically run. We're making sure we're taking care of everyone. So as these challenges come up, we can more fundamentally deal with them because we're dealing with them together systemically as a society. So I think there's actually a lot of optimism that, for some sense of the term, that we can reach a socialist society and that we can organize for it today and we can win.
Yeah, and another one of the areas, like I said at the beginning, I come from more of a Marxist background, but another area where I'm very, very Marxist is the idea that there is no peace, love, and happiness. There is no utopia at the end of the road, and part of that comes from a belief that as long as there are two people, there will be things we need to work out, right? There will be things that we need to parse through. There will be potential conflicts, and then the other side of that is we live on a dynamic world, right? We very much live on a ever-changing world. And because of that, we can't build a static end state, right? It's not possible. We can hit like an equilibrium or a harmony at one point or another, possibly in a utopian world, right, where things go well, in generations in the future, like we hit Star Trek for a second, right, or something like that. But then guess what? The Earth is living and it changes, right? And the land underneath us is literally moving, at the same time that our planet is hurling around the sun and our sun is hurling around a galaxy and our galaxy is hurling around the universe, right? There's so much that can happen. There's so much that can happen that it means that there is no real, end. That we're always going to be, it's the struggle, and the struggle never ends, right? We can make the struggle a lot better, but there's always going to be things in the world, especially if we're talking about mass society, that we need to address. And since I brought up Star Trek would be incredibly boring in terms of plot if they didn't have to do this struggle, if they didn't have to work out the things, right? Even when we get to that point, there's still those clashes. So it's definitely an ongoing process. That last line, we know capitalism is failing us, right? This is one of the hardest parts in our job. People are often tend to generalize, to overly simplify, like we have much of this, workshop out of necessity. But people are creatures of habit, right? And we know that capitalism is on track for 100% fail rate. Well, 99.9999% fail rate, right? And even like the Musks and the Bezos, like in their lifetime, they're never going to see comfortable habitation outside of this planet, right? Space is dangerous. Other planets are dangerous. It's not the International Space Station is not a luxury hotel, and it won't be within our lives, right? So even that 0.000001% that capitalism isn't failing, they won't survive it, right? They won't get out at the end of the tunnel. It'll take them down with us too. But for the 99.999% of us that it's not working, it's got 100% failure rate coming forward. Our challenge is to convince them that even something with a potentially 50% failing rate is better, right? People will often choose the failure they know over a success that they don't. So it's really a key part of what we have to, do, and kind of the human condition that we do have to kind of overcome is, convincing people not only that, that there is 100% failure rate on ahead for capitalism, it's failing, but that we need to take risks that that will involve failures to get to something better in the long term. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Like
so
95% failure is still better than 100, right? Like,
right.
I mean, it's a shitty argument to have, but it's true, right? And
yeah, right. When you're up against climate change and survival depends on it, we have to try something. So,